The scent of burnt sugar and disappointment hung thick in the kitchen air as Abigail Martinez stared at the collapsed birthday cake on the marble counter. 3 layers had become 2.5, the top tier sliding sideways like a broken promise. Through the tall windows of Ravenshollow Manor, November rain drummed against glass with the persistence of unpaid bills. Her fingertips still tingled from the heat of the oven, and flour dusted her black servant's dress like snow that would never melt. The cake was meant for Master Ethan's birthday, though nobody celebrated anymore. Not since the accident 5 years ago that left the Lord's son bound to a wheelchair, his legs useless beneath expensive blankets. Abigail had seen him only in passing, a pale figure wheeled through corridors by Rosa, the head housekeeper, his dark eyes holding depths she couldn't fathom. The other servants whispered that he never spoke, never smiled, never acknowledged the world that continued spinning around his stillness. But today was different. Today, something in her chest had tightened when she'd seen the calendar hanging in the pantry. The date circled in faded red ink, November 15th. Someone had remembered, once upon a time. Someone had cared enough to mark it. The kitchen door swung open with its familiar creak, and Rosa's weathered face appeared, her gray hair pulled into its customary severe bun. "The cake ready yet?" "Lord Marcus wants everything perfect for tonight's dinner with the Blackwood family." Her eyes landed on the lopsided disaster. Madre de Dios, what happened? Heat crawled up Abigail's neck. "I'm sorry, Rosa. I can start over, but it'll take another 3 hours. "There's no time." Rosa's voice carried the weight of 30 years serving the Ravenshollow family. "The Blackwoods arrive at 7. They're expecting our finest presentation." She moved closer, her shoes clicking against the stone floor, and Abigail caught the scent of lavender soap and old secrets. "This won't do at all." Through the window, Abigail glimpsed a figure in the garden. Master Ethan sat motionless in his wheelchair beneath the bare oak tree, rain misting his face as if he welcomed it. 23 years old today, and he looked carved from marble himself. Beautiful and untouchable and infinitely sad. Her phone buzzed against her hip, and Abigail's stomach dropped as she read the text from St. Mary's Hospital. "Final notice. Payment required within 48 hours for continued treatment. Contact billing department immediately." Her mother's cancer treatments had drained every penny, maxed every credit card, and still it wasn't enough. Never enough. "Rosa," she heard herself saying, "what if I made something smaller? Just for Master Ethan? A little birthday cupcake?" The older woman's expression sharpened. "You know the rules, mija. The family doesn't celebrate anymore. Not since—" She gestured vaguely toward the window where Ethan remained, statue still, in the rain. "But it's his birthday. It's not our place to decide what the family needs." Rosa's tone softened slightly. "Lord Marcus has his reasons for everything. We serve, we don't question." Abigail nodded, but her hands were already moving, gathering ingredients from the pantry shelves. Butter, eggs, vanilla extract, enough for one perfect cupcake. Her grandmother's recipe, the one that had never failed to bring smiles to sad faces. "I'll make it on my own time, after the dinner service." Rosa studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering in her dark eyes. "Some kindnesses are more dangerous than cruelties in this house, Abigail. Remember that." But Abigail was already measuring flour, her movements quick and sure. Outside, thunder rolled across the New England countryside like a warning she chose not to hear. An hour later, she held a perfect cupcake crowned with swirls of chocolate buttercream. She'd found a single birthday candle in the supply drawer, pink and cheerful, completely out of place in the mansion's Gothic grandeur. The contrast made her smile despite everything. The corridors of Ravenshollow Manor stretched before her like arteries of shadow and whispered history. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched from gilded frames as Abigail made her way toward the conservatory, where she'd often seen Master Ethan during the day. Her heart hammered against her ribs, each step echoing off marble floors that had witnessed centuries of secrets. She found him exactly where she'd expected, by the tall windows overlooking the rose garden, his wheelchair positioned to catch the last gray light of afternoon. He didn't turn when she entered, but something in his posture shifted, a subtle tension that suggested awareness. "Master Ethan?" Her voice came out smaller than intended. "I brought you something." Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they held hers with an intensity that made her chest tighten. He was beautiful in the way broken things sometimes were. Sharp angles and pale skin that looked like it had never seen sunlight. Dark hair falling across his forehead in waves that begged to be smoothed away. "I know it's your birthday," Abigail continued, stepping closer despite the voice in her head that sounded remarkably like Rose's warnings. "I thought you might like—" She held out the cupcake, its pink candle unlit but somehow still hopeful. For a moment that stretched between heartbeats, Master Ethan simply stared at the offering in her hands. Then something extraordinary happened. The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "You made this for me?" His voice was rough from disuse, but warm honey underneath the rust. "It's not much, but no one has made me a birthday cake in 5 years." He reached out with hands that trembled slightly, whether from emotion or disuse she couldn't tell. When his fingers brushed hers as he took the cupcake, fire shot up her arm. "What's your name?" "Abigail Martinez. I work in the kitchens." "Abigail." He said it like he was tasting something sweet. "Do you have matches?" She fumbled in her apron pocket, producing a book of matches from the restaurant supply store. Her hands shook as she struck one, the flame dancing between them as she lit the candle. In that moment, surrounded by the golden glow, Master Ethan looked younger, less like a tragic figure from a Gothic novel, and more like the young man he actually was. "Make a wish," Abigail whispered. He closed his eyes, and she watched his lips move silently before he blew out the flame. Smoke curled between them, carrying the scent of vanilla and possibility. "Thank you," he said, and his eyes met hers again. "This is the kindest thing anyone has done for me in—" His words cut off as footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Abigail's blood turned to ice water. Those were not Rose's quick, efficient steps, or the measured pace of the other servants. These footsteps belonged to someone with authority, someone who commanded rather than served. The conservatory doors swung open, and Lord Marcus Ravenshollow stepped inside like a storm given human form. Tall and imposing, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that seemed to see straight through to whatever secrets you were trying to hide. His presence filled the room, making the air itself feel heavier. His gaze moved from his son, still holding the cupcake, to Abigail, who suddenly felt very small and very foolish in her flower-dusted dress. "What?" Lord Marcus said, his voice carrying the chill of winter mornings. "Is this?" Master Ethan's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Abigail stepped forward. "It was my idea, sir. I thought, because it's his birthday—" "You thought?" Lord Marcus's attention fixed on her with laser precision. "And who gave you permission to think, Miss Martinez?" The use of her name sent ice through her veins. Of course he knew who she was. Lord Marcus Ravenshollow knew everything that happened in his domain. "No one, sir. I just wanted to show kindness to my son." The words should have sounded warm, but they carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "How touching. And tell me, Miss Martinez, what do you know about kindness in this house?" Abigail's mouth went dry. Beside her, she felt rather than saw Master Ethan tense, as if preparing for impact. "I'm sorry, sir. I overstepped—" "Yes," Lord Marcus said quietly. "You did." He moved closer, and Abigail caught the scent of expensive cologne and something else, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. The question is what to do about it. Rain lashed against the windows with renewed fury, and somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled across the moors. In the growing darkness of the conservatory, Lord Marcus's eyes seemed to catch and hold light in a way that wasn't quite natural. "Father," Master Ethan said, his voice steady despite the tension radiating from his frame, "she meant no harm." "Harm?" Lord Marcus repeated the word like he was examining it from all angles. "No, I don't think Miss Martinez means any harm at all. But intentions and consequences are very different things, aren't they?" He turned his attention back to Abigail, and she felt like a rabbit caught in the gaze of a wolf. "Tell me, Miss Martinez, how long have you been working for our family?" "6 months, sir." "6 months?" He nodded slowly. "And in those 6 months, has anyone explained to you why my son doesn't celebrate birthdays anymore?" Abigail's throat constricted. "No, sir." "Then let me enlighten you." Lord Marcus moved to stand behind his son's wheelchair, his hands coming to rest on the handles with possessive certainty. 5 years ago, Ethan was celebrating his 18th birthday with friends. They decided to take a midnight drive through the countryside. Young men, full of life and reckless with it. His voice never changed pitch, but something cold crept into it. The car went off Blackmore Bridge. Ethan was the only survivor. Abigail's heart clenched. She wanted to look at Master Ethan, to offer some gesture of comfort, but Lord Marcus's gaze held her captive. "Since that night," he continued, "we don't celebrate birthdays in this house. We don't pretend that time passing is something to rejoice over. We accept what is, and we don't indulge in fantasies about what might have been." The cupcake sat forgotten in Master Ethan's lap, its cheerful frosting suddenly obscene in the face of such raw truth. "Do you understand now, Miss Martinez, why your kindness might be misplaced?" "Yes, sir." The words barely made it past the tightness in her throat. "Good." Lord Marcus's smile was sharp as winter moonlight. "Then you'll understand why this cannot happen again." But as he spoke, his eyes lingered on his son's face, and Abigail saw something there that didn't match his cold words. Pain, deep and old and carefully hidden. Whatever Lord Marcus was protecting his son from, it went deeper than birthday cakes and cupcakes. "However," Lord Marcus continued, and his voice carried a note that made Abigail's pulse quicken, "I find myself curious about something. Tell me, Miss Martinez, why did you risk your position to bring my son a birthday cake?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Abigail realized that her answer mattered more than she understood. Outside, the storm was growing stronger, and she could feel the weight of secrets pressing down on the conservatory like a physical thing. "Because," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice, "everyone deserves to be remembered on their birthday. Everyone deserves to know that someone cares they exist." Lord Marcus studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned down to whisper something in his son's ear, words too quiet for Abigail to catch. Master Ethan's eyes widened, and he looked up at his father with something that might have been hope. When Lord Marcus straightened, his smile was different, still sharp, but warmer somehow. Dangerous in an entirely new way. "Miss Martinez," he said, "I think we need to—" The words died in Lord Marcus's throat as the conservatory doors burst open with explosive force. Vincent, his personal security chief, stood silhouetted against the corridor's amber light, his usually composed face etched with urgency. Rain dripped from his black coat onto the marble floor, forming small pools that caught the lamplight like spilled mercury. "Sir," Vincent's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, "we have a situation. The Blackwood meeting. It's not what we thought." Lord Marcus's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, the careful patriarch dissolving into something far more dangerous. His hand tightened on Ethan's wheelchair handles, knuckles white against the leather grip. Explain. Now. Intelligence suggests they're not here for negotiations. Vincent's eyes flicked to Abigail, then back to his employer. The unspoken message was clear. Not in front of the help. But Lord Marcus seemed to have forgotten Abigail's presence entirely. His attention focused on Vincent with laser intensity, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. How long do we have? They're already through the outer gates, maybe 10 minutes before they reach the main house. Abigail felt her body move backward instinctively, pressing against the cool glass of the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs as pieces of a puzzle she didn't understand began clicking together in her mind. The way the other servants avoided certain topics. Rosa's warnings about dangerous kindnesses, the fear she sometimes glimpsed in their eyes when Lord Marcus's name was mentioned. Father. Ethan's voice was steady, but Abigail caught the tremor underneath. What's happening? Lord Marcus's jaw worked silently for a moment, his storm-gray eyes calculating angles and possibilities. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Vincent, secure the house. Standard protocols. Make sure Rosa gets the staff to the safe areas. Sir. Vincent nodded crisply and turned to go, but Lord Marcus's voice stopped him. Wait. His gaze found Abigail, pinning her in place like a butterfly on a board. Miss Martinez stays here. The words hit her like a physical blow. Sir, I should go help in the kitchens. No. The single word carried finality that brooked no argument. You wanted to show kindness to my son. Now you can stay and see what kindness costs in this house. Vincent's expression tightened, but he didn't argue. Years of service had taught him when Lord Marcus's decisions were absolute. I'll post guards at the conservatory entrances. Do that. Lord Marcus moved around his son's wheelchair to face the window, his silhouette dark against the storm-lashed glass. And Vincent? Tell Rosa that Miss Martinez's mother should be moved to the private wing of St. Mary's, tonight. Abigail's world tilted sideways. How do you know about my mother? Lord Marcus didn't turn around. I know everything about the people who work in my house, Miss Martinez, including the fact that Maria Elena Martinez has stage 3 pancreatic cancer and approximately 6 weeks to live without immediate treatment. The cupcake slipped from Ethan's nerveless fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than thunder. Chocolate frosting spread across marble like a small, sweet tragedy. You investigated me, Abigail whispered. I investigate everyone. Now he did turn, and his eyes held depths that seemed to swallow light. The question is why a young woman with a dying mother would risk her job to bring cake to a stranger. Because it was the right thing to do. The words came out stronger than she felt, fueled by an anger she didn't fully understand. Because he looked lonely, and everyone deserves to be remembered. Yes, you said that. Lord Marcus stepped closer, and Abigail caught that strange scent again, something wild and predatory beneath the expensive cologne. But kindness toward my family comes with consequences, Miss Martinez. Some people might call them rewards. Others would call them chains. Through the windows, headlights swept across the drive like searching fingers. The Blackwood contingent had arrived, their black cars moving through the rain with ominous purpose. Abigail counted at least 6 vehicles, more than seemed necessary for a simple dinner meeting. Ethan, Lord Marcus's voice gentled when he addressed his son. I need you to go to your room. Now. Father, I'm not a child anymore. You're my child. The words carried weight that made the air itself seem heavier. And after what happened 5 years ago, I will not lose you to another moment of misplaced trust. Ethan's hands gripped his wheelchair arms, tendons standing out like cables under skin that never saw enough sun. You can't protect me from everything. Watch me. The exchange crackled with history Abigail didn't understand, layers of pain and protection and old wounds that had never properly healed. She found herself thinking of her own mother, lying in that sterile hospital bed, fighting a battle they couldn't afford to win. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "if you know about my mother, then you know I need this job. I need the insurance, the steady pay. Whatever's happening tonight, I won't interfere. I'll do whatever you need me to do." Lord Marcus studied her with those unsettling eyes. "What I need, Miss Martinez, is for you to stay exactly where you are and keep my son company. Can you manage that?" Before she could answer, the first gunshot echoed across the estate. Grounds. The sound split the night like breaking glass, sharp and unmistakable. Abigail's body jerked as if she'd been struck, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Through the rain-streaked windows, she saw muzzle flashes lighting up the darkness like deadly fireflies. "So much for dinner conversation," Lord Marcus murmured, but his casual tone couldn't hide the predatory tension that suddenly defined his every movement. He moved to a wall panel Abigail had never noticed before, his fingers dancing across what looked like decorative molding. The panel slid away to reveal an arsenal that made her stomach drop. "Father." Ethan's voice held a note she'd never heard before. Not fear, exactly, but something close to it. "Stay calm." Lord Marcus selected a pistol with practiced efficiency, checking the magazine with movements that spoke of long familiarity. "Vincent's people are good, but the Blackwoods didn't come alone." "The Blackwoods?" Abigail's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "I thought they were family friends." Lord Marcus's laugh was sharp enough to cut. "In our world, Miss Martinez, family and enemies are often the same thing. The Blackwoods have been business partners for decades, but partnership doesn't always mean friendship." Another burst of gunfire, closer this time. Close enough that she could hear glass breaking somewhere in the house. Close enough that her legs nearly gave out beneath her. "I don't understand," she managed. "What kind of business?" "The kind that requires very specific skill sets." Lord Marcus moved back to his son's wheelchair, his free hand settling on Ethan's shoulder with gentle certainty. "The kind that explains why a single act of kindness toward my family might be the most dangerous thing you've ever done." The conservatory lights flickered and went out, plunging them into darkness broken only by the stormlight from outside. In that sudden gloom, Lord Marcus seemed to grow larger, more dangerous, less human somehow. "Miss Martinez," his voice came from the darkness, calm and terrible. "I'm going to give you one chance to leave. Walk out that door, collect your things, and forget you ever worked here. Vincent will make sure you and your mother are taken care of. New identities, clean slate, enough money to start over anywhere you choose." Abigail's heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. The smart thing would be to run. The safe thing would be to take his offer and disappear into the night before whatever was coming reached them. Instead, she found herself moving closer to Ethan's wheelchair, her hands finding the handles that his father had reluctantly released. "Or," she said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice, "I could stay." In the darkness, she heard Lord Marcus draw a sharp breath. "You don't know what you're saying." "Maybe not." Abigail's fingers tightened on the wheelchair handles, and she felt Ethan reach up to cover one of her hands with his own. His skin was cold, but his grip was strong, anchoring her to a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. "But I know what it's like to be alone when the world falls apart. And I know that sometimes the right thing to do is the dangerous thing." Another explosion of gunfire, and this time the windows rattled in their frames. Somewhere in the house, someone screamed, a sound that cut through the night like a blade through silk. Lord Marcus was quiet for so long that Abigail began to wonder if he'd simply melted into the shadows. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note she couldn't identify, something that might have been respect or regret or both. "Vincent was right," he said. This is not what we thought it would be." "What is it then?" Ethan asked. "War," Lord Marcus said simply. "The Blackwoods have decided that 30 years of alliance isn't enough. They want everything. Territory, resources, legacy. And they're willing to murder my son to get it." The words hung in the darkness like a death sentence. Abigail felt Ethan's hand tighten over hers, and she realized that whatever she'd stumbled into by giving him a birthday cupcake, there was no going back now. "Then we don't let them," she said, and was amazed to discover she meant it. The sounds of battle moved closer, echoing through the corridors of Ravenshollow Manor like approaching thunder. In the darkness of the conservatory, 3 people who barely knew each other prepared to face whatever came through those doors together. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the human drama playing out beneath its fury. But inside, something had shifted, something that would change all their lives forever, if they lived long enough to see morning. The last thing Abigail heard before the conservatory doors exploded inward was Lord Marcus's voice, soft with something that might have been pride. "Then God help us all." Smoke and splinters filled the air as armed figures poured through the shattered doorway, their faces hidden behind tactical masks that made them look like nightmares given form. The emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in hellish red that turned the conservatory into something from a fever dream. Abigail couldn't think. Instinct took over, the same instinct that had driven her to work 3 jobs to pay for her mother's treatment, that had made her bake a cupcake for a lonely young man she barely knew. She threw herself forward, spreading her arms wide to shield Ethan's wheelchair, making herself the largest possible target between the gunman and the boy she'd somehow sworn to protect. "Don't!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Please, he can't even walk." The lead gunman hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Lord Marcus to move. He flowed through the darkness like liquid shadow, the pistol in his hand speaking once, twice, 3 times with deadly precision. 2 of the attackers dropped, but there were more behind them, always more. "Abigail, get down." Ethan's voice, sharp with terror not for himself but for her. But she couldn't get down, couldn't move, because moving meant exposing him to the weapons trained on their position. So she stayed where she was, arms spread wide like a bird protecting its nest, and felt something inside her chest crack open. Not breaking, but expanding, like a shell too small to contain what was growing inside it. "She's just a servant," Lord Marcus's voice carried across the chaos, and there was something in it Abigail had never heard before: desperation. "She's not part of this." "Everyone's part of this now," the lead gunman replied, his voice mechanically filtered through his mask. "The Blackwood family sends their regards, Marcus. Your time is over." The gun swung toward Abigail and Ethan, and she closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's face, of chocolate frosting and birthday wishes, of hands that had been cold but strong when they'd covered hers. The shot that came wasn't the one she'd expected. Lord Marcus moved with inhuman speed, putting himself between his son and the gunman's weapon. The bullet meant for Ethan took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the wall of windows. Glass exploded outward into the storm, and rain began to pour into the conservatory like the sky itself was weeping. "Father!" Ethan's scream cut through everything else: gunfire, thunder, the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. But Lord Marcus was already moving again, wounded, but far from finished. Whatever he was, whatever this family was, it went deeper than money and influence and old New England power. As Abigail watched, frozen in place by shock and adrenaline, Lord Marcus seemed to grow larger, more dangerous, his eyes catching the emergency light in a way that definitely wasn't human. The remaining gunmen fell back, their confidence shaken by something they didn't understand. In the sudden lull, Lord Marcus's voice cut through the chaos with absolute authority. "Vincent, now!" The response was immediate, Explosions of sound and light as Vincent's security team finally reached them, surrounding the conservatory with professional efficiency. The surviving Blackwood operatives found themselves outgunned and trapped, their carefully planned assault dissolving into chaos. But in the moment before Vincent's people restored order, Abigail saw something that would haunt her dreams for years to come. Lord Marcus, wounded and bleeding, turned to look at her with eyes that blazed with inhuman fire. When he smiled, his canine teeth were too long, too sharp, too white. "Thank you," he said, and his voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones, "for protecting my son." Then the world dissolved into chaos as law enforcement flooded the manor, as medical personnel swarmed over the wounded, as the carefully constructed normalcy of Abigail's life crumbled like a house built on sand. Hours later, as dawn broke gray and cold over the Connecticut countryside, Abigail sat in Lord Marcus's private study, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of expensive cigars and old leather. Ethan was beside her, no longer in his wheelchair but supported by crutches that gleamed like silver in the morning light. His legs, she'd learned, worked better than anyone had believed. The paralysis had been as much psychological as physical, a prison built from guilt and carefully maintained by his father's overprotectiveness. Lord Marcus himself sat behind his massive desk, his wounded shoulder professionally bandaged, but his eyes as sharp as ever. The red had faded from them, leaving only storm-gray depths that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. "The Blackwoods are finished," he said, without preamble. "Those who survived the night will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Their assets have been redistributed." "And us?" Abigail's voice was hoarse from screaming, but steady. "What happens to us?" Lord Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying her with those unsettling eyes. "That depends entirely on what you want, Miss Martinez. You've seen things tonight that most humans never see. You know things that could get you killed in the wrong hands. But not in yours. Not in mine." His smile was sharp but warm. "You protected my son when you had every reason to run. You chose loyalty over safety, courage over common sense. Those are qualities I value very highly." Through the tall windows, Abigail could see workers already beginning repairs to the conservatory. By evening, she suspected, there would be no trace of the violence that had shattered the night. Money, she was beginning to understand, could erase almost anything. "My mother," she said, "you promised, is already in the private wing at St. Mary's, receiving the best treatment available. The experimental therapy program she's been enrolled in has an 87% success rate." Lord Marcus's expression softened slightly. "She'll live, Miss Martinez, long enough to see grandchildren if that's what you choose." The words hit her like a physical blow. After months of watching her mother fade away, of feeling helpless against the inexorable advance of disease and debt, the simple promise of hope was almost too much to bear. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I want," Lord Marcus said carefully, "to offer you a position. Not as a servant, but as part of this family. Ethan needs someone he can trust, someone who sees him as more than a tragic figure or a burden, and I need someone who can protect what matters most to me when I'm not here to do it myself." "Protect him from what?" "From the world," Ethan said, speaking for the first time since they'd been brought to the study. "From people who would use me to hurt him. From enemies who see weakness where they should see strength." He turned to look at her, and his eyes held depths that matched his father's. "From the loneliness that nearly destroyed me before you walked into that conservatory with a birthday cupcake." Abigail felt something click into place inside her chest, a sense of rightness she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. This strange, dangerous family with their secrets and their shadows and their inhuman protectiveness. This wounded young man who'd been hiding behind paralysis and silence until someone cared enough to remember his birthday. This terrifying patriarch who'd faced down armed killers to protect his son and somehow managed to save her mother's life in the same breath. "What kind of position?" she asked. Lord Marcus's smile was sharp as winter starlight. "The kind that comes with a very generous salary, excellent benefits, and the absolute certainty that your life will never be boring again." Outside, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, sending shafts of golden light across the manor grounds. In that light, Abigail could see the future spreading out before her like an unwritten story, dangerous and beautiful, and completely unlike anything she'd ever imagined. "There's one more thing," Lord Marcus said, and his voice carried a note that made her pulse quicken. "Something you deserve to know before you make your decision." He stood and moved to a wall safe hidden behind a painting of the manor in its younger days. His fingers moved across the digital lock with practiced ease, and the heavy door swung open to reveal stacks of documents, jewelry, and what looked like very old photographs. From the safe, he withdrew a manila folder thick with papers and photographs. He placed it on the desk between them, his expression unreadable. "Your father," he said simply. "Roberto Martinez. You've always wondered what happened to him." Abigail's breath caught. Her father had disappeared when she was 7 years old. Walked out one morning for work and simply never came home. Her mother had never spoken of it, deflecting questions with the skill of someone who'd had too much practice keeping painful secrets. "How could you possibly—" "Because he worked for me," Lord Marcus said quietly. "Roberto Martinez was one of my most trusted people for 15 years. He helped me build this empire, helped me protect this family. And when the Blackwoods started making moves against us 12 years ago..." His voice trailed off, and something that might have been regret flickered across his features. "They killed him," Abigail whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "They killed him," Lord Marcus confirmed. "Made it look like he'd simply abandoned his family and disappeared. I've been looking for his daughter ever since. My way of honoring a debt that can never truly be repaid." The room spun around her. Everything. Her mother's job. Applications that had somehow always been accepted. The apartment they'd been able to afford despite having no credit. Even the job at Ravenshollow Manor. All of it had been orchestrated by the man sitting across from her. "You've been taking care of us," she said. "All these years." "Poorly," Lord Marcus said, and now she could hear the weight of old guilt in his voice. "If I'd done better, your mother never would have gotten sick. You never would have had to work 3 jobs just to survive. You would have grown up knowing you had family who cared about you." "We're not family." "Yes," Ethan said, his voice cutting through her protest with gentle certainty. "You are. You became family the moment you chose to stay instead of run. The moment you put yourself between me and those guns. Family isn't just blood, Abigail. Sometimes it's choice." Through the windows she could see the grounds of Ravenshollow Manor stretching away toward the forest, beautiful and terrible, and full of secrets she was only beginning to understand. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of construction, the conservatory being rebuilt, the damage being erased, the family preparing to move forward. "So," Lord Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, "what's it going to be, Miss Martinez? Are you ready to learn what it really means to be part of this family?" Abigail looked at the folder on the desk, at Ethan's hopeful expression, at Lord Marcus's sharp smile that promised both danger and protection in equal measure. Her old life, her small, careful, limited life, lay behind her in pieces. Ahead stretched something vast and uncertain and absolutely terrifying. She thought of her mother, probably waking up in a clean hospital bed with real hope for the first time in months. She thought of her father, whose memory had finally been given the honor it deserved. She thought of chocolate frosting and birthday wishes, and the moment when Ethan's cold hand had covered hers. "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "I'm ready." Lord Marcus's smile widened, showing just a hint of those two sharp teeth. Then welcome to the family, Abigail Martinez. Try not to let us get you. The study door burst open, and Rosa appeared in the doorway, her usually perfect composure shattered. Her face was pale as winter moonlight, and her hands shook as she gripped the doorframe. "Sir," she gasped, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to see this. Now." In her other hand, she held what looked like an old photograph, black and white, edges yellowed with age. From across the room, Abigail could see figures standing in front of Ravenshollow Manor, but the details were impossible to make out. Lord Marcus was on his feet instantly, moving with that inhuman speed and grace that spoke of things far older than money and power. He took the photograph from Rosa's trembling hands, and his face went absolutely still. "Where did you find this?" His voice was deadly quiet. "In her things," Rosa whispered, her eyes fixed on Abigail with something that looked like terror. "Hidden in the lining of her suitcase." "Sir, the resemblance. It's impossible, but—" Lord Marcus turned the photograph around, and Abigail's world tilted sideways. Staring back at her was her own face, or close enough to make her blood freeze in her veins. Same dark hair, same determined chin, same eyes that seemed to hold depths of stubborn courage. But the photograph was old, decades old, and the woman in it wore clothes from another era entirely. Standing beside the woman was a man Abigail recognized from other photographs on Lord Marcus's walls, his father, the previous lord of Ravenshollow Manor. And in the background, barely visible but unmistakable, was the conservatory where she'd given Ethan his birthday cupcake. "Sir," Rosa's voice cracked like dry leaves, "what if her working here wasn't coincidence? What if the Blackwoods— What if they've been planning this for longer than we thought?" Lord Marcus finished, his eyes meeting Abigail's across the room with something that might have been accusation or might have been awe. "What if everything that happened tonight was exactly what someone wanted?" The photograph trembled in Abigail's hands as she stared at her own impossible face, looking back from decades past. Outside, the morning sun was quickly disappearing behind fresh storm clouds, and the sound of approaching thunder rolled across the Connecticut countryside like a promise of secrets yet to be revealed. In the distance, she could hear the sound of cars approaching. Too many cars, moving too fast, arriving at an hour when no visitors should be expected. Lord Marcus moved to the window with predatory grace, and when he turned back to face them, his expression was carved from granite and shadow. "It seems," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the windows rattle, "that our troubles with the Blackwood family are far from over." The conservatory door exploded inward with a thunderclap that shook the manor's ancient bones, filling the space with acrid smoke and the bitter taste of gunpowder. Abigail's world compressed to a single, crystalline moment, the weight of Ethan's wheelchair handles beneath her palms, the sound of his sharp intake of breath, the way emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red that made shadows dance like demons. She didn't think, couldn't think. Her body moved with the same instinct that had driven her to work 3 jobs for her mother's treatment, that had made her bake a birthday cupcake for a stranger who'd looked lonely. She spread her arms wide, making herself the largest possible shield between the armed figures pouring through the shattered doorway and the boy she'd somehow sworn to protect. "Don't!" The word tore from her throat raw with desperation. "Please, he can't even defend himself." The lead gunman's weapon swung towards them, and she felt Ethan's hand grip hers with surprising strength. His wheelchair trembled beneath her protective stance, but he didn't try to pull away. Instead, she heard him whisper, "Thank you," with a voice that carried weight far beyond his years. Time crystallized like ice forming on glass. She could smell the ozone from the shattered electrical systems, feel the cold rain beginning to pour through the broken windows, taste her own fear sharp and metallic on her tongue. Behind her, Lord Marcus moved with inhuman speed, his pistol speaking death in measured syllables, but there were always more shadows flowing through the smoking doorway. The bullet that should have ended everything went wide when Ethan suddenly lurched forward in his wheelchair, his supposedly paralyzed legs pushing against the footrests with desperate strength. The shot that had been meant for Abigail's heart instead caught Lord Marcus as he threw himself between them and the gunman's weapon. Blood bloomed across his white shirt like a crimson flower, and he crashed into the wall of windows with enough force to spiderweb the remaining glass. Rain began to pour into the conservatory like the sky itself was weeping, and in that moment of chaos, everything changed. Lord Marcus rose from the shattered glass with movements that defied human limitation. His eyes blazed with fire that had nothing to do with the emergency lighting, and when he smiled, his canine teeth were far too long, too sharp, too white. Whatever he was, whatever this family was, it went deeper than old New England money and influence. The gunmen fell back, their professional confidence shaken by something they couldn't understand. In the sudden lull, Vincent's security team finally reached them, surrounding the conservatory with tactical precision that spoke of long preparation for exactly this scenario. But Abigail barely registered the sound of surrender, the tactical commands, the arrival of law enforcement. Her entire focus was locked on Ethan, who was looking up at her with eyes that held depths she'd never seen before. Not the wounded young man who'd accepted a birthday cupcake from a stranger, but someone far older and more complex than she'd imagined. "You stayed," he said, his voice carrying wonder and something that might have been love. "Even when you knew what we were." "I still don't know what you are," she whispered, her hands still gripping his wheelchair handles like anchors in a storm. "Does it matter?" Lord Marcus's voice cut through the chaos, and she turned to see him standing among the shattered glass, his wounded shoulder already beginning to heal with speed that made her stomach clench. "You chose loyalty over safety. You chose my son over your own life. That makes you family, regardless of what else you discover." The word family hit her like a physical blow. Through the broken windows she could see the dawn breaking gray and cold over the Connecticut, a high countryside, painting everything in shades of silver and possibility. But inside the ruined conservatory, surrounded by the debris of violence and the aftermath of choices she barely understood, something fundamental had shifted. Hours later, they sat in Lord Marcus's private study, the events of the night settling into her bones like old scars. Ethan was beside her on the leather sofa, his legs stretched out before him. Legs that worked far better than anyone had believed, the paralysis revealed as psychological armor against a world that had tried to destroy him once before. Lord Marcus stood at the tall windows, his wounded shoulder professionally bandaged, but his posture radiating the controlled power of something barely contained. The morning light caught the silver threading through his dark hair, and she realized for the first time that he was far older than he appeared. "The Blackwoods are finished," he said, without turning around. "Their surviving operatives will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison, and their assets have been redistributed among more deserving parties." "And my mother?" Abigail's voice was hoarse from the night's terrors, but steady. "Is already receiving the best treatment available at St. Mary's private wing. The experimental therapy program has an 87% success rate." He turned to face her, and his eyes held depths that seemed to swallow light. "She'll live, Miss Martinez. Long enough to see grandchildren, if that's what you choose." The promise hit her like salvation and threat combined. After months of watching her mother fade away, of feeling helpless against the inexorable advance of disease and debt, the simple offer of hope was almost too much to bear. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Lord Marcus moved to his desk with predatory grace, his movements carrying echoes of the inhuman speed she'd witnessed during the attack. From a hidden drawer, he withdrew a manila folder thick with photographs and documents that looked decades old. "I want to give you the truth," he said, placing the folder between them. "About your father, about why you're really here, about the debt that has defined my family for the past 12 years. Her breath caught. Roberto Martinez had disappeared when she was 7, walked out for work one morning and simply never returned. Her mother had deflected questions with the skill of someone who'd had too much practice keeping painful secrets. "Roberto Martinez worked for me for 15 years, Lord Marcus said quietly. "He was one of my most trusted people, helped me build this empire, helped me protect this family. When the Blackwoods made their first move against us 12 years ago, they targeted him first." The room spun around her as understanding flooded through like ice water. "They killed him. They killed him and made it look like abandonment. I've been looking for his daughter ever since. My way of honoring a debt that can never truly be repaid." His expression carried weight that seemed to age him before her eyes. "Your mother never knew. The job applications that were always accepted, the apartment you could somehow afford, even your position here, all of it was my attempt to protect what remained of his family. You've been taking care of us." The words came out flat with shock. "Poorly," he admitted, and she could hear old guilt in his voice. "If I'd done better, your mother never would have gotten sick. You never would have had to work 3 jobs. You would have grown up knowing you had family who cared about you." Beside her, Ethan reached out to cover her hand with his own. His skin was warm now, no longer the cold touch of someone half lost to despair. "Family isn't just blood, Abigail. Sometimes it's choice. You became family the moment you chose to stay instead of run." Through the tall windows, she could see the grounds of Ravenshollow Manor stretching toward the forest, beautiful and terrible, and full of secrets she was only beginning to understand. The sound of construction drifted in, the conservatory being rebuilt, the damage being erased, the family preparing to move forward. "There's something else," Lord Marcus said, his voice carrying a note that made her pulse quicken. He opened the folder and withdrew a photograph so old its edges had yellowed to parchment. "Something you need to see before you decide whether to stay." The photograph trembled in her hands as she stared at her own impossible face looking back from decades past. Same dark hair, same determined chin, same eyes that held depths of stubborn courage. Standing beside the woman was a man she recognized from other portraits, Lord Marcus's father, the previous lord of Ravenshollow Manor. "The resemblance is uncanny," Ethan breathed, his voice tight with something between wonder and fear. "It's more than resemblance," Lord Marcus said, his eyes meeting hers with intensity that made the air itself seem to thicken. "That woman's name was Elena Vasquez. She worked for my father in 1952, and she saved his life during an attack remarkably similar to what we experienced tonight." Abigail's world tilted sideways. "That's impossible. I would have known. My family would have." "Your family has kept secrets for generations, Miss Martinez. Sometimes protection requires forgetting." Lord Marcus moved to stand beside the window, his silhouette dark against the morning light. "Elena Vasquez disappeared after the attack, along with her young son. My father spent years searching for them, guilt-ridden that his enemies had forced her to sacrifice everything for his survival." "Her son," Abigail whispered, pieces of the impossible puzzle clicking into place. "Roberto Martinez. Your father grew up knowing he owed his life to my family. When he came to work for me, it wasn't coincidence. It was legacy. And when he died protecting us, the debt passed to you." The photograph slipped from her nerveless fingers, but Ethan caught it before it could fall. His eyes were wide as he studied the image, and she saw recognition dawn across his features like sunrise. "Abigail," he said softly, "look at the background." She followed his gaze and felt her heart stop. Behind the figures in the photograph, barely visible but unmistakable, was the conservatory where she'd given him his birthday cupcake. Unchanged after 70 years, as if time itself had paused within these walls. "What are you saying?" she breathed. "I'm saying," Lord Marcus replied, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones, "that your presence here was never coincidence. I'm saying that some debts echo across generations, and some families are bound by forces deeper than blood or choice." Before she could respond, the study door burst open. Rosa appeared in the doorway, her usually perfect composure shattered. Her face was pale as winter moonlight, and her hands shook as she gripped the doorframe. "Sir," she gasped, "the perimeter alarms. Multiple vehicles approaching from the North Road. They're not ours." Lord Marcus was at the window instantly, his movements flowing with inhuman grace. When he turned back, his expression was carved from granite and shadow. "How many?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "At least 6 cars, sir. Moving fast, coordinated formation." Rosa's voice cracked like dry leaves. "Sir, what if tonight wasn't the end? What if it was just the beginning?" Through the glass, Abigail could see black vehicles threading through the forest road like a funeral procession. Too many cars, moving too fast, arriving at an hour when no visitors should be expected. The morning sun was disappearing behind fresh storm clouds, and the sound of approaching thunder rolled across the countryside like a promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Lord Marcus moved to his desk and withdrew a key from his vest pocket. With practiced movements, he unlocked a drawer and retrieved what looked like an antique silver locket. When he opened it, Abigail glimpsed a photograph inside, the same woman from the manila folder, but younger, smiling, holding the hand of a small boy with her own dark eyes. "Your grandmother," he said, placing the locket in her palm. "Elena Vasquez. She wore this the night she saved my father's life, and he kept it as a reminder of the debt he could never repay." The silver was warm against her skin, warmer than it should have been after decades in a locked drawer. As her fingers closed around it, she felt something shift inside her chest, not breaking but expanding, like recognition of something she'd always carried but never understood. "The cars," Ethan said urgently, moving to the window on his crutches with speed that spoke of rapidly returning strength. "Father, they're almost to the main gate." "I know." Lord Marcus's voice carried calm that was more terrifying than panic. "Would have been." "Rosa, activate full security protocols. Get the staff to safe areas. And contact Vincent. Tell him we need the special teams, not just regular security." "Sir, what about Miss Martinez?" All eyes turned to Abigail, and she realized that this moment, this choice, would define everything that came after. Behind her lay a life of struggle and limitation, of watching her mother fade and working jobs that barely kept them afloat. Ahead stretched something vast and dangerous and absolutely uncertain. But in her hand, the silver locket pulsed with warmth that felt like heartbeat, like legacy, like the weight of choices made by women who'd faced impossible decisions before her. "I'm staying," she said, and her voice was steady as stone. "Whatever's coming, we face it together." Lord Marcus's smile was sharp as winter starlight. "Then welcome to the family, Abigail Martinez. Try not to let us get you killed." Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, and in the distance she could see headlights cutting through the gathering storm like searching eyes. But inside the study, surrounded by photographs and secrets, and the promise of protection that came with terrible cost, she felt something she'd never experienced before. The absolute certainty of belonging somewhere, even if that somewhere was built on shadows and blood and the kind of loyalty that only came from facing death together. The locket in her palm grew warmer still, and for just a moment, she could have sworn she heard her grandmother's voice carried on the wind. "Some debts can only be paid forward, Mija. Some families are chosen by forces larger than ourselves. Thunder rolled across Ravenshollow Manor, and Abigail Martinez, daughter of Roberto, granddaughter of Elena, protector of Ethan, and newest member of a family that defied every natural law, prepared to discover what it truly meant to belong to something worth dying for. The cars were at the gate now, and whatever came next would test every bond they'd forged in blood and choice, and the simple act of refusing to abandon someone who needed protection. But as she stood between Lord Marcus and his son, the silver locket warm against her palm, and the weight of 3 generations pressing at her back, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged.